Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala ma ba'd. Today inshallah we start on hadith number 13. Bab min al-imani an yuhibba li akhihi ma yuhibbu li nafsih. This chapter is titled of Iman is to love for someone else what you love for yourself. And as I've been trying to root in your minds, when the ulama of hadith compile numerous hadith, there's a logic behind it. Right? It's not just random hadith that are being put in random places. There's a thought process here. And so for us to extrapolate, excuse me, for us to extrapolate some of the richer meanings of these ahadith, we have to ask the question, what is the relationship between the hadith and the chapter or the unit? Right? We are in Kitab al-Iman, the unit on Iman. So what is the relationship between loving something for someone else and Iman? Right. And here, the Prophet ﷺ says, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه. You do not perfect your Iman, you do not complete your Iman until you learn to love for someone else what you love for yourself. Right. So here, the crux of the question is emotions, your feelings. How do you feel for your fellow human being, especially your fellow Muslim? When you look at a fellow Muslim, what reactions does that inspire or foment in your heart? What does it do to your heart? Especially those who you see a lot and there tends to be natural competition with them, right? Like family members, like other people from the community. Because we human beings, we have a natural tendency to want to feel better. Right? We mistakenly tie material to self-worth, which is incorrect. So this hadith is coming and telling you, look, if you cannot learn to have positive emotions towards your fellow Muslim, then you will never be able to complete your Iman. And there are reasons for that, right? As we'll get to in just a moment here. But the idea is how you feel towards a fellow Muslim falls under the question of Iman. And how you feel towards other believers can either improve your Iman or it can harm your Iman. So why is that the case? What is it about loving for somebody else what I love for myself that is related to Iman? And the answer goes back to why in the first place do we feel envy towards others? Why would we have negative feelings towards others? And the answer is because we have an amount of selfishness that we want to appease. This is natural to the human being. It's normal, right? The problem comes when it becomes out of balance to where it promotes negative behaviors, right? So if I have an amount of envy towards somebody else, then that envy will influence the way I behave with that individual. And now my decisions on how to act are being promoted by my own selfishness rather than Allah and His Messenger. You see where the problem comes in? And this is why you cannot complete your Iman until you learn to love for somebody else what you love for yourself. The idea here isn't just this being so compassionate and nice. That's not what's going on here. What's going on here is a tension between the forces that influence you. A person who completes their Iman is somebody who Allah and His Messenger are the only forces influencing that person's decisions and behaviors. That is complete Iman right there. Envy, on the other hand, is a powerful force that erodes your ability to do based on what Allah and His Messenger say. Right? Look at Iblis. He's the prime example of envy. He not only disobeyed Allah, he outright rejected Allah face to face, so to speak. You see the audacity? He's looking at Allah, figuratively speaking. He's in the presence of Allah. This is a direct conversation. I mean, just imagine this. A direct conversation. And Iblis went from being this seemingly obedient creation of Allah to becoming the most animus towards Allah in a second. All because of what? The envy. So envy is one of the 5 major spiritual diseases. There will always be an amount of envy in the heart. It's natural. And it's there for a reason, because you have a responsibility to protecting your herd. Right? Each one of you has your responsibilities. Envy gives you an amount of strength to be able to jealously protect it. Right? But it's once that envy begins to grow out of balance, that's where the problem comes in. So this hadith is essentially giving us the remedy to envy. And that is what? To love for someone else what you love for yourself. Now, nobody's born having this ability. Nobody's born. They're either taught to have it, or they themselves exercise it to where they become, practicers of this hadith. So it is part of Iman that when we see something in the possession of someone else, instead of reacting negatively through envy, we react by saying, I wish I had that for myself. And because I wish I had it for myself, I'm happy for the person who actually has it. Now you might say that, talk is cheap. That's okay. Telling yourself this is the beginning of actually changing the way you view the world and you view other people. That's how it starts. Just like the beginning of any sin is just entertaining the thought of doing it. That's the beginning of any sin. Conversely, the beginning of any good deed is by entertaining the thought. Right? So this hadith is the antidote, it's the remedy of envy. It's what balances envy out to keep envy where it belongs, and that is to protect what you are responsible for and preventing envy from going beyond to where it influences your decisions and how you treat other people. Right? So here we see the relationship between envy, between this hadith and Iman. Envy kills Iman. It erodes Iman. It weakens Iman. Why? Because it influences your decisions and sidelines Allah and His Messenger in terms of their influential force on you. Now there's a second element here, and that it has to do with rida, contentment. The fact of the matter is, as Muslims, we have a foundational belief that Allah distributes rizq. Allah is the one who distributes provisions. And when somebody has something, then we explain it by saying Allah either gave it to them or provided them the means for them to acquire it. Either way, it goes back to Allah. Allah willed for that person to possess that possession, whether it's beauty or money or physical strength or knowledge or whatever it is. Allah willed it for that person. He created for them the means for them to be able to acquire it. So if I am upset with what they have, then who am I really upset with? It's Allah. So a jealous person, if that jealousy becomes too rooted and too big, it cannot but kill the relationship with Allah. Just like it killed the relationship between Iblis and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They just cannot accept the way Allah distributes rizq. They are discontent with what Allah has given them, and they're discontent with what Allah has given others. That's the way it ends up being explained. So how can somebody have Iman when they are missing contentment? You just can't. It will slowly kill it. So لا يؤمن أحدكم. You will never perfect your Iman. You will never complete it. There will be major problems in your Iman if you do not learn to love for others what you love for yourself. And look at how wise this statement is. It's not simply rooting this sentiment in just morality. It's actually rooting it in practicality. It's making you the center here. By telling you, do you love this? You love it? You enjoy it? You prefer it for yourself? The start is yourself. And then it extends to where, okay, if I love it for myself, then part of Iman is to love it for somebody else. The next hadith, Bab, Hubbur Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam min al-Iman. The chapter that loving the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam is part of Iman. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله تعالى عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال والذي نفسي بيده لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى أكون أحب إليه من والده وولده. The Prophet ﷺ says, by the one who my soul is in his hands, you will not complete your Iman until I am more beloved to you than your parents and your children. Once again, you have this issue of what you love being related or tied to your Iman. So here once again, what your heart feels is part of Iman. Right? It's part of Iman. There are certain things that are naturally human. That's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is when what is naturally human becomes overpowering and toxic. Right? So the Sharia comes to put guardrails for us to prevent what is naturally human, our human tendencies, to becoming satanic or devilish tendencies, right? So what we feel are indications of Iman. Take for example, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala juxtaposes believers with hypocrites in terms of how they react to events that affect the Muslims, right? If something good comes to the believers, what happens to the believers? They're happy, right? So let's just say, inshallah, it's our hope that a good result comes out of Palestine. What is going to be the reaction of believers? They're going to celebrate that. They're going to feel it more than just an event that happened that is irrelevant to them. They're going to feel that it's relevant to them, although it's not directly affecting them. Why? Because the identity is shared. Right? The identity is shared. It is natural for the human being to have affiliation with people they identify with. Right? That's human nature. So if I truly affiliate to Iman, then what affects the people of Iman, I take it personally. Right? So if something comes that makes them happy, it makes me happy. And if something comes that makes them upset, it makes me upset. If something comes that harms them, it harms me as well. But on the other hand, the hypocrites, what's their reaction? If something good comes to the believers, in tamsaskum hasanatun tasu'hum. They're upset. They're mad. Good came to the believers, they're upset. Okay, wait a minute, don't you identify with us? Why are you upset? In tabsaskum hasanatun tasu'hum wa in tusibkum sayyi'atun yafrahu biha. But if something bad comes to you, they're happy. They're glad. They're enjoying it. Right? Which tells you what? They don't identify with you. They don't. Right? So what goes on in the heart affects Iman. And so here the Prophet ﷺ says, how much you love him is part of Iman. Why? Because love is the force that influences us. And we all begin with a tremendous love for ourselves. And then certain things come to shift it. In some societies, love for the parents is blind. In other societies, love for the parents is almost non-existent. So there are cultural influences as well. But whatever it is, who or what you love influences your decisions. Accordingly, if you want to complete your iman, who did we say needs to be your number one influence? Allah and His Messenger. By extension, His Messenger, alayhi salatu wassalam. And if love is what influences, then your ability to follow the Messenger and submit to Allah is in accordance to how much you love them. So you will not complete your iman until you learn to love the Prophet more than your parents and your children, because this is who we most naturally love. These are the two categories of people who we are willing to sacrifice our own well-being in order for their well-being, right? That's normal. So the Prophet comes and says, even your parents and even your children need to be second to the Messenger, alayhi salatu wasalam. Now Muslims, this is easy for us to digest. We love and adore the Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam. The question is, how do I get to that level? How do I get to that level? And this is, something that posed a challenge to Umar radiallahu ta'ala an. He said, Ya Rasulullah, I love you more than my parents and my children, but not myself. And the Prophet said, Umar, no. You cannot accept that until I become more beloved to you than yourself. So Umar left, the conversation ended. He came back later and he said, Ya Rasulullah, now I love you more than I love myself. So my question is, what changed? What did he think about for him to make that conscious decision to say, no, I love the Prophet more than myself? Right? What happened there? Allahu A'lam, we know as adults who have many years behind us, who have seen a few days of our lives that have been quite dark and difficult. We've had to make decisions that the decisions seem like lose-lose. Between being between a rock and a hard place. It's very tough, right? But a person of Iman knows there is always another way that gets me out of this dilemma or predicament of being between a rock and a hard place or a lose-lose situation. Allah knows it. But the Messenger knows it as well. Alayhi salatu wassalam. If only I had the ability to ask Rasulullah. Alayhi salatu wassalam. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Wouldn't it be wonderful that when you have a problem, you go to the Prophet and say, Ya Rasulullah, this is my problem, what should I do? See, I see you're like, man, yeah, that would be quite wonderful. What am I saying here? What I'm saying here is He has the solutions to your problems. Knowing that, we cannot but love that. We cannot but feel the need for Him. Alayhi salatu wassalam. So we wish we had that. Now we have His sunnah. We have His ahadith, right? We can find it. We have His seerah. We can find the solutions somewhere. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring our attention to it. But the idea is, we learn to love the Prophet more than ourselves when we realize that He has the solutions to our problems. That I can better perfect myself when I be like Him. Alayhi salatu wassalam. Right? I was reading the other day an individual who says, be like the sun. Be like the sun. When the sun sets, it's gone. What does it leave behind? A beautiful horizon. Gorgeous with colors and serenity and tranquility. He says, be like the sun. When you end something, you leave it in the most beautiful state, so that people look forward to seeing you again. Right? The summer might end and say, Alhamdulillah, the summer is done. It's been a hot summer. Or for those who come from different parts of the world where it's cold, the winter ends. I wish the winter would never come back, because it's harsh, right? But the sun, do you ever sit there thinking, I wish the sun doesn't rise again? No, because there's a beauty it has. It leaves the day with a beauty that makes you want it to come back. So when you look at the Prophet ﷺ, you never find that somebody came to him except that they left with a feeling of beauty. ﷺ. So we can learn to love Him more than we love ourselves when we realize how much we need Him and how much we can gain from Him. Right? Alayhi salatu wassalam. Bab halawat al-iman. The chapter on the sweetness of iman. وعنه رضي الله تعالى عنه عن النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام قال ثلاث من كن فيه وجد حلاوة الإيمان أن يكون الله ورسوله أحب إليه مما سواهما وأن يحب المرء لا يحبه إلا لله وأن يكره أن يعود في الكفر كما يكره أن يقذف في النار. Here the Prophet ﷺ says, there are three things that whoever has it, then they will taste the sweetness of Iman. The first is for Allah and His Messenger to be more beloved to them than anyone else. And we explained this, right? So once again, you have another hadith showing that what you love is part of your Iman. Right? What you love is part of your Iman. And I mean, just look at the world today. It is not a coincidence that when a people or a generation distances themselves from Allah, they begin to develop very bizarre habits and attachments. Very bizarre. When you look at art, just postmodern art, just Google postmodern art, look at what comes up. It's very bizarre. You have these images of like a person's face melting, a person's body completely deformed, or a building just kind of falling apart. That's not random. Art and architecture reflects what's going on inside the human mind and the society, right? When you look at the skyscrapers of like the 90s and the 80s and this time, they're very plain, they're very dull, but they're very rational, efficient, because that was the time back then. Everything was rational and efficient. But as that ignored the needs, the emotional needs of human beings, the postmodern era comes with something very bizarre. Like all of that is falling apart. But when you look at Islamic arts, it's quite different. Western art is very human-centric. Like the human being is always there in their pictures. Islamic art, it's not. It's more patterns, geometry, and the colors they use. Blue, purple, very cool and warm colors. That's not random. Islamic art reflects their aqeedah, our aqeedah. So what you find is a lot of symmetry and order. Because Islam brings symmetry and order to a person's life and their mind and their relationships. The colors are very cool and calming and inspirational, because that's what Islam inspires in a person's emotions. It calms them. It cools them. It inspires them. Right? So since Allah is central to the mind of the believer, Islamic art centralizes the creation in terms of how Allah created it. Whereas in the West, since the human being is the center and the most important thing, Western art reflects that. And when the human being is falling apart, their art shows that. Right? So for the believer, Allah is central. And so what goes on in your heart tells you what's going on with your iman, the state of your iman. How much you think about Allah and His Messenger tells you how much you're attached to them. How much emotional response you get from hearing Allah's words and the Prophet's words tells you about your relationship to them. The stronger it is, the sweeter iman becomes as a reward from Allah. Because what does iman really require? It requires a lot of sacrifice. While the entire world is going about appeasing their desires, living life, enjoying everything available, Muslims imprison themselves, they confine themselves quite often. Right? We feel isolated, we feel second class. It's because of our belief. But we still hold on to it, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards us by giving us something better. And that is the halawa. Because although they might be enjoying the sweetness of the world, that sweetness of the world leaves a very bitter taste in the heart. But Islam, although practicing it at times might be bitter and inconvenient, what it leaves behind is sweetness and a positive taste. Right? So that's one. Number two, وَأَنْ يُحِبَّ الْمَرْأَ لَا يُحِبُّهُ إِلَّا لِلَّهِ. And to love others for the sake of Allah. Again, here your relationships are not being influenced by your own self-interests. They're being influenced by Allah. So when I look at a fellow person, I look at them from the lens of what Allah thinks of that person. If somebody does what Allah loves, then my assumption is that Allah loves that person. And if Allah loves that person, then why wouldn't I love that person? If I truly love Allah. When you truly love someone, you will love what they love. It's just natural. Right? So here, once again, you have a second element where a person's belief, their iman, is closely tied or strongly tied to their attachment to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Number three, وَأَنْ يَكْرَهَ أَنْ يَعُودَ فِي الْكُفْرِ كَمَا يَكْرَهُ أَنْ يُقْذَفَ فِي النَّارِ. To despise going back to their old jahili ways, their ignorant ways, their disbelief, just as much as they would dislike to be thrown in a fire, right, or in the hellfire. You see, I might love something, but if I'm still loving something else, then you have a problem. That's a tension, right? So you see a lot of these Hollywood movies where somebody was in a relationship, didn't work out, and then they get in another relationship, and for whatever reason, the first person comes back in the person's life, and now there's a struggle, right? Well, what that struggle indicates is that your attachment to the second person hasn't been perfected. Let's put it that way. It hasn't been perfected. If you are truly and strongly attached to that second person, the first person becomes irrelevant. In fact, you would dislike it because it could harm what you do have. So you develop a distaste for it. You want to be away from it. You see what I mean here? So what you find is that one of the spiritual challenges of Muslims, or specifically those who live part of their life not practicing, is that later they will have this relapse. Man, I wish I did this before I became religious. I wish I did that before I became religious. Man, I wish I kind of got that desire out of my system before I became religious. This happens. And it's almost like a principle of tazkiyah. You are bound to hit this bump in your journey to Allah. You're bound. The relapse. It happens to everybody, right? And the reason is because the heart hasn't detached itself from its previous attachments. Now, it might have developed an attachment to Allah, but this alone does not necessarily detach them from what they were previously attached to. All it does is veil it, right? And what tends to happen when a person becomes practicing is that they put themselves in the environments that promote this new lifestyle of theirs. So it's like those attachments are hidden for a while, but they're not gone. Later, they start to unveil themselves. This is a huge test that many people fail. Many people fail, right? And it's a test that needs to happen because you cannot grow your iman while you still have these attachments. One of them is going to go. One of them is going to go. And that's the test. So Allah will unveil these attachments that were still there in order for you to work on breaking them so that your iman can continue to grow. Right? So part of completing iman is to despise what contradicts iman. So if a person loves to pray and loves to fast and they're okay with giving zakah and all of it is dandy, but they still have this inclination, man, I wonder what it's like to drink alcohol. Man, I wonder what it's like to go in this place or that place. I wonder what's going on in the club. What? There's this type of interest, curiosity. That's dangerous right there. It's very dangerous. Why? Because it's just a sign that how much they value Iman is not as strong as it needs to be. Because if they realize that these other practices harm their Iman, and they truly love their Iman, then what's going to happen is they're going to despise this. If they truly love Allah, then they will shiver and tremble just to the thought of doing something that makes Allah upset. But if they sit and they entertain, it's like, yeah, that sounds cool, man, that seems interesting. Irrelevant what Allah thinks of that, then what does that say? The attachment needs work, right? So once again here, you see how what goes on within is a tremendous part of Iman. It's an important part of Iman. So just as we are conscious and observing our external behaviors, we have to be conscious and observe our internal behaviors as well. باب علامة الإيمان حب الأنصار. Among the signs of Iman is loving the Ansar, right? The group from the companions, the natives of Medina. وعنه رضي الله تعالى عنه عن النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام قال آية الإيمان حب الأنصار وآية المنافق or آية النفاق بغض الأنصار. A sign of Iman is to love the Ansar, and a sign of hypocrisy is to despise the Ansar. Now, I briefly touched on this earlier, saying that if you truly identify with something, if something has become intertwined with your identity, you will love those who identify the same way. Very natural. You will identify with those who identify the same way. Now, have you ever gone to a convention? Yeah? Isn't it really cool? Isn't it really fun? Why? Because conventions revolve around a particular theme, and the only reason you go to that theme or that convention is because it somehow ties to you. And it gathers people who are interested in the same thing. So it's very fun. It's like you're around the people who are like you. Right? But if you despise this thing, would you ever go to the convention? No. And if you're there, would you be comfortable? Absolutely not. Right? So although the group being identified here is the Ansar, it's not limited to the Ansar. Perhaps there was a particular event that happened where the Prophet ﷺ wanted to identify to the Muslim community that, you have to respect the Ansar. But the principle when it comes to Iman is not exclusive to the Ansar. You have another hadith that says that, if you love me, love Ali, radiallahu ta'ala an, same thing with Fatima, same thing with the Muhajirin, etc. So it's not an issue of the who, but an issue of the what. What about them? It is their Iman. We love the Ansar for their Iman. Not because they looked a certain way, not because of their ethnicity, not because of their lineage. It's irrelevant. But we love them for their identity, right? And these are people, they're called the Ansar, the helpers, because of what? Because they helped the Prophet ﷺ. So if we love the Prophet, how can we not love those who help the Prophet? It doesn't make any sense, right? So, like our attachments are part of Iman, who we are attached to is also part of Iman. Who we are attached to is part of Iman as well. Our identity, our feelings, our emotions, what we identify with is like a filter. It removes from our lives those that don't fit the narrative, right? So somebody who truly loves Iman is important to them. They will put themselves in the places that gathers the people of Iman, right? And somebody who does not love Iman, despises it, will not go there. Why would they? Right? So among Iman is who we love. Who do you love? When a Muslim preoccupies their time learning about celebrities and how many dogs they have and the name of their dogs, they can name the sports players of every team and the NBA. They know all the details, but they can't name 5 companions. That's a problem, right? It might not be intentional. Don't misunderstand me, right? There's a culture here. They're not intentionally distancing themselves from Iman, but it is a problem because it begs the question: who are you more interested in? These players, these celebrities, or those who pioneered your belief system? Right? So who do you love? Who do you know? Who do you resonate with? If they are believers, then that's a good sign. عن عبادة ابن الصامت رضي الله تعالى عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال وحوله عصابة من أصحابه بايعوني على أن لا تشركوا بالله شيئا ولا تسرقوا ولا تزنوا ولا تقتلوا أولادكم ولا تأتوا ببهتان تفترينه بين أيديكم وأرجلكم ولا تعصوا في معروف فمن وفى منكم فأجره على الله ومن أصاب من ذلك شيئا فعوقب في الدنيا فهو كفارة له ومن أصاب من ذلك شيئا ثم ستره الله فهو إلى الله إن شاء عفى عنه وإن شاء عاقبه فبايعناه على ذلك. Now, I don't quite understand the relationship between this hadith and the point of this chapter and the unit, but basically the hadith is referring to when the Ansar came to the Prophet ﷺ and gave him bay'ah. And the Prophet said, give me allegiance, bay'ah is allegiance. Give me allegiance to the following conditions. You will not worship other than Allah. You will not steal. You will not fornicate. You will not kill your children. You will not lie about who the father of your children are or is. And you will not disobey on issues that are moderate and reasonable. Right? And whoever fulfills this, then the reward is with Allah. But whoever falls into some sins and they are punished in this life for those sins, then that punishment expiates their sins. Meaning, it's done in this life, they won't be accountable for it in the afterlife. But if somebody falls into a sin and Allah conceals their sin, Allah doesn't punish them, then they are to Allah's mercy. If Allah wants to pardon them, He could do that. Or if Allah wants to hold them accountable, He can do that as well. And so they gave him bay'ah. Perhaps the point here is why love of the Ansar is part of Iman. And that is the stance that they took to protect and to help the Prophet ﷺ, but in terms of their lifestyle as well. They joined the ranks of the Prophet based on Iman, not based on worldly gain. What they gave allegiance to the Prophet for was the 6 things that I just mentioned. Not give me allegiance to the state and the identity of the state and to preserve the state and the best interest of the state and whatnot. It has nothing to do with that. Their allegiance to the Prophet was not worldly. It was morally and afterworldly. So part of Iman is your allegiance is to who and why. Is it a worldly thing or is it a moralistic thing? Is it for the purpose of worldly gain or is it for the purpose of afterworldly gain? Clearly the bay'ah was afterworldly here. Clearly, moralistic afterworldly. There's nothing clear in terms of what they will get from this world at all. So part of Iman is understanding why you do what you do. And to better understand that, look at who you're allied to. Look at what you give allegiance to. Look at what you spend your time doing. Why you do what you do. And make sure that it is for the purpose of the afterlife, not this life. Make sure it's morally consistent with what pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and not what is consistent with what pushes your self-interest forward. Right? Now, just one comment here, a little bit off topic, and that is the statement of the Prophet ﷺ, وَلَا تَعْصُوا فِي مَعْرُوفٍ. Right? Do not disobey on that which is moderate and reasonable. We know that the Prophet ﷺ only commands that which is good. يَأْمُرُهُمْ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَاهُمْ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ. He commands that which is good, and he prohibits that which is bad. Right? What we see happening, especially in times of tribulation in the Muslim community, is that, and this isn't just a phenomenon in the Muslim community, it's a phenomenon in any society, and that is when the central government begins to weaken, you have a lot of subgroups that begin to form. Right? A lot of subgroups begin to form. And that is just open season for cults and ill-intending people who want to gain out of this. Right? And so in the Muslim world, you will find people who come and say, we're the chosen people. You see this group of 7 people here? Allah has chosen us. Right? And in order to be part of our group, you have to give bay'ah, you have to give allegiance to the leader of the group. Right? Because it's part of Islam. You see how they gave bay'ah to the Prophet ﷺ? We're just replicating that. Nuh-uh. Nuh-uh. Right? Anybody who says, give me allegiance, no, we're not interested. My allegiance to Allah and His Messenger, that's it. Right? We Muslims, we're a stubborn people. We are a stubborn people. But we're stubborn when it comes to haqq, to truth, not worldly things. When it comes to our aqeedah, our belief, our Quran, our sunnah, we're very stubborn. And that's why nobody was successful in corrupting these sources. Of course, by the hifz of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But Allah preserves it through means, through us. We're very stubborn. And that's why it's difficult to lead a Muslim community, religiously speaking, because we're stubborn. And that's good. We don't blindly follow. So get this mold out of the Muslim community's mind, where certain people should just be listened to for what because they're a sheikh or a scholar or maulana or sidi or whatever, and all this nonsense. Nobody went around saying Sidi Abu Bakr. No one went around saying Maulana Umar. Now, I understand there's respect and there's etiquette. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm not saying go to your local scholar and say, hey, so-and-so, right? Talking to them like they're just another person. What I'm saying is we do that out of etiquette and respect, not out of blind following, right? Our blind following, in fact, our following of Allah and His Messenger isn't blind. It's rational. And it's a thought-out process. And أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ أَفَلَا تَتَفَكَّرُونَ أَفَلَا تَتَذَكَّرُونَ. Use your mind. Think about what Allah says. He's always telling us this. Now, since Allah is perfect and His Messenger only says that which is truth, it's always rational. But the idea is the Muslim mindset is never blind following. Here's my bay'ah Sidi and Maulana, and then he goes around doing the most nasty of things. Right? I mean, there are some cults out there that are so corrupt that literally one of the tenets that they use to brainwash their followers is if you see your sheikh drinking alcohol or doing very immoral things, then you have to do tawbah because you have thought bad of your sheikh. This is a stupidity. Like, they want you to be blind to what you see. Our bay'ah is only to Allah and His Messenger, not to anybody else, right? And لا تعصوا في معروف. The Prophet said, don't disobey when what I tell you is reasonable. Of course, as Rasulullah, everything he said is reasonable. What's the principle? Right? If the messenger was not allowed to do that which is unreasonable and only command that which Allah tells him to do, like our following of the Prophet ﷺ is under the condition that what he's telling us to do is what Allah is telling us to do. Or else he's just a human being. إِنَّمَا أَنَا بَشَرٌ مِثْلُكُمْ. I'm a human being like you. يُوحَى إِلَيْهِ. The only difference is that Allah has given me revelation. So our obedience to the Prophet is an extension of our obedience to Allah. We obey him, we love him because Allah told us to, or else he's a human being. Alayhi salatu wassalam. Right? So we don't want a community that just follows their shuyukh blindly and limits their own creativity and their own skills. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in the creativity, your mind, your skills, your energy, what you can offer the Muslim community. Not a following that says sheikh and tahiyyati and all this stuff. So let's just take this lesson from this hadith. وَلَا تَعْصُوا فِي مَعْرُوفٍ. Don't disobey on things that are moderate. Our following of any individual post-Prophet ﷺ is under the condition that what they are telling us to do is in line with what Allah and His Messenger are telling us to do. Beyond that, you have no rights over us. Allah Ta'ala alam. Let's go ahead and stop there. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. We stopped at hadith number 19.